everybody. Welcome. Welcome all. And thank you for joining us for Parent Trusted Pathways to Kids podcasts. This is our opportunity to gain insights, exchange ideas, and be inspired by the leaders shaping the landscape of kids podcasts. I'm Matthew Winter. I'm your host today, your moderator for this panel. I'm a teacher. I'm a school librarian here in Baltimore, Maryland, Columbia, Maryland, if you're around the area. For over 15 years, and I host and produce the children's book podcast, as well as a kid's book about the podcast, which was named Apple's Best of 2021. We like that recognition. That's fun. Included on our panel today are Jim Jacob, founder of Storybutton and host of All Things Mr. Jim. Jim is responsible for these wonderful shows like Spyology Squad, Kids Short Stories, Kids Animal Stories, and has this wonderful goal. Jim, if I could share from your bio, that your goal is that by 2030, kids will listen to more content than we watch. We have a big listening advocate in you, and I appreciate that. Jim, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, next we have Melissa Victor. Melissa, are we going by Melissa today? I know on the Slack sometimes we use nicknames, but how we're gonna go Melly? I love it. It just makes me smile, so I had to say it. So my friend Melissa Victor, I know through Kids Listen, and because Melly hosts a fabulous podcast, one that Melly, you got a librarian in your corner recommending your show all the time. Stoopkid Stories is a wonderful, wonderful show. I was excited to learn, Melly, when I learned more about your beyond podcast life, that you are not only NYC based, but that you're a performer and that you've been chasing Broadway dreams. I'm rooting for you. I think knowing that dream, I can really hear it in your show, and I love that. I'm so glad you're here, and I love this quote. You said, I want young kids who look like me to see and hear themselves in all forms of storytelling. I love how expansive your thinking is about connecting with kids. Thanks for being here, Melly.
Thanks for having me. Hey, everybody.
I have my, next up, my collaborator and co-conspirator, Merideth. I feel like ever since we met, we've been running toward the expansive view we have of kids podcasts and how they will grow, change, connect with educators, connect with parents, all of these things. But I should say first that you are the founder of Storitopia, which is a podcast player and discovery app for kids. As I said, Merideth, I love and admire your focus on research, on growth, on engagement. I love that you approach how we connect with kids in that way. You really, I think, are wonderfully data-driven and also very passion-driven. So thanks for joining us, Merideth.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
And then my bestie, who I haven't even known that long, but I just feel like me and Laura, we've been cut from the same cloth. Laura Ordoñez, everybody, this is a looking 10 years into the future. Laura's going to have all the podcasts and we're all going to be going to her to be learning. I've learned so much already from her, but I know her also from Common Sense Media, which I think many, many of you out there know and trust. She is the senior editor, head of digital content and curation. And Laura brought us podcast reviews on Common Sense Media, those Common Sense Selects titles, and is really helping through that gateway, that portal to parents that they have, to make sure that parents know what's out there, what's wonderful, what's diverse, what's really connecting and talking up to kids. And she's doing, I think, some really groundbreaking work there. Laura, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, Matthew, I think we've been talking since podcast ratings and reviews as my baby was born. So.
Your baby was born.
Yeah.
And I came from going, I'm a librarian and I've been with Common Sense forever, since all of the online safety stuff had started and all that. So to meet and make a friend within Common Sense Media was, of course, a very special thing for me. And I should say that's why I'm so excited for all of you listening and joining us tonight, and all of you that are watching on the archive, to have this panel together. Because one thing we talk about an awful lot in children's media is that we have to have gatekeepers between the device that you're listening on and that content that gets to the kids that we're intending it for. And podcasts have episodes coming out all the time. So it's perhaps harder to know what's the right thing for my kid, what is talking up to my kid, what's making my kid feel safe, and more importantly, what can I trust to walk away from knowing that it's going to be the right media for my kid, and it's going to be something that they can feel respected in and safe in, and they can grow and learn and connect within. Hence the diversity of experiences and voices on this panel. We got my buddy Kendra from Children's Media Association who's running the comments. But those of you that are joining us both on LinkedIn or here on StreamYard, please feel free to hop in, say hi, let us know where you're from. Let us know if you're a podcaster, if you're a TV producer, if you're a teacher, a grown-up, a mom, whatever you are coming in with. We love that you're here and love that you want to have this conversation. And a good friend of mine once taught me from doing a lot of ed camps that the smartest person in the room is the room itself. So I want you to know that we here do not have all the answers, but we are here to talk, to communicate, and we welcome you sharing everything as well. So Melly, the podcast, all of the podcasters, but this podcaster is going to take a breath. I know that I've been really going there, and I want to turn our attention to you first. I would love, Melissa, if you could please talk to us about Kids Listen, the mission of Kids Listen, how the organization is helping not only to connect kids to great podcasts from around the world, but also how the Kids Listen community is helping to gather data through its annual survey to better understand the habits of kids and families listening to podcasts.
For sure. I love all things Kids Listen. I am Kids Listen's biggest cheerleader. And for those who are unfamiliar, we are a grassroots organization that advocates for high quality, keyword high quality, audio content for kids. I think that's very important. And when I say high quality, meaning the sound and also the stories that come and the content that comes into the kids podcasting space. We are a community of podcast creators, podcast advocates, podcast app creators who really advocate for the growth of the medium. And we create these high standards and ethics to serve the best practices for development, production, monetization, things like that. So we're literally just a community of people who love podcasts for kids, and we come together and we talk about the ups and the downs, the joys and the no joys of being a part of this world. Everything from I have this idea, can someone help me write a story, or okay, I've been doing this for a year, how do I start monetizing? We do a lot of cross promotion within the family, and I love to call it a Kids Listen family because that's what we are. And I like to say that we are your trusted experts for where parents and teachers and educators go to find this content. Because to be a part of Kids Listen, you have to send in an application, and our board, we vet every single show that comes into our organization, that comes onto our platform. And we've turned some podcasts down because they did not meet the standards and the ethical standards of what we stood for. So that is very, very, very important. And another thing that we've dabbled in over the past couple of years is getting into research of how people are listening to the show, how people are using this, where they're using it. And one big takeaway that I got from our latest survey is of how people are listening is co-listening, and how kids are really listening with their grown-ups, and how listening with your grown-ups cultivates conversations at the dinner table, cultivates conversations at bath time and car rides. And that's so important and so integral to, I guess, family growth and community and friendships. So co-listening was a really, really big takeaway from our last survey. Also, we're seeing listener rates skyrocket as more people join the medium, as more lovely app creators keep creating safe spaces for people to go listen. So we really are seeing that kid podcasts are on the rise, and we just want to continue to create a safe space for creators to come in, learn, mess up, make mistakes, learn some more, and really push the growth of kid podcasting everywhere.
Thank you, Melly. I threw a link in the comments. It's kidslisten.org. You can see the survey results at a glance there, as well as a number of the members. Melly, do you know off the top of your head how many active members or podcasts are represented at Kids Listen right now?
So the last time I looked, we have about 200 plus.
Wonderful.
People represented in Kids Listen itself. And I know a lot of our OGs, I like to call them, have shows, but they aren't producing anymore. But the show is still live on air. For example, one of our founders, Mike Merideth, his show is Aaron's World. And it's still, kids are still turning to Aaron's World and listening to those stories, which is a beautiful thing. Like, say you make a podcast, I'm like, okay, I'm done. It can still stay alive and it's evergreen content. So that's another beautiful thing about podcasting. You can always turn to it, even if it's 5-10 years old.
It definitely makes us different than the adult space, doesn't it? Because our listeners are always growing out of our content, and new listeners are growing in. And so that content becomes evergreen, as you said. And often I think we know and we see from Kids Listen survey results that kids do listen over and over, much like the way they watch their shows on YouTube and on streaming and wherever. If you're around children, you see those behaviors, and those behaviors are echoed in the podcast space as well. That's wonderful to know that we're around 200 strong, especially knowing that, you go on to Spotify or iTunes and you have access to all of the podcasts, every single one of them. And it's hard to find if you don't know what to search for. It's hard to find what's there, to have this trusted community that is saying, here's some stuff right here. Kids Listen is one space that I think of a couple that we'll mention tonight that is really doing that really well and helping to connect. So yay, thanks for representing. I'm a proud Kids Listen member. I know, I think actually probably almost all of us on this panel are, because we have a bunch of podcasters on the panel.
Yes.
But thank you, Melly. Okay, so Laura, my friend, I'm going to turn to you next, because we are going to get into these podcast reviews. Common Sense has long been a trusted source for parents looking to find safe, smart choices across all different types of print and digital media. I wonder how many people listening right now have accessed your movie reviews, your so many things that right away we're like, does this have cursing? Does this have any? My son wanted to watch Nimona, and I know that graphic novel, and I'm like, I don't know that my 12-year-old should watch Nimona. I don't know what's in it. But sure enough, you had your review, I think, the day of the release. You were ready for those people that were looking. So I'd love to ask you, what are the components of a Common Sense Media podcast review? And how are you and your colleagues using that space to help expand the conversations around podcasts?
Yeah. So for those who don't know of Common Sense Media, I actually knew about Common Sense Media before I started. I am a parent, first and foremost. I'm a single parent. So I have to have my eyes on everything, and Common Sense Media was my saving grace, especially for a child who loves video games. And we are a nonprofit dedicated to creating a safe and healthy and equitable digital world for kids and families. And on our consumer side, we do that through our ratings and reviews. We also have an education side, which works boots on the ground in different schools across the United States, really doing our digital content or digital citizenship program. And I'm on the consumer side. So about, oh my gosh, what was it? Over a year ago, we launched our podcast ratings and reviews. I was working on that for about a year before that even came to fruition, because we needed to put all efforts into understanding the kids podcast space. And we actually worked with Kids Listen and talked to Melly and some other members there before, we launched, to really understand the space, and just dived headfirst into it. And now if you look at our podcast ratings and reviews, they're structured the same way as all of our other reviews. You have your content elements, which will show you how much violence, how many positive messages, is there language, are there products and purchases, and we break that down. But we also have a full actual review. Is it any good? Is the audio quality good? Can you listen? Can you co-listen? Melly was talking about earlier, we really go in depth, and you can kind of pick and choose what you get out of there. On those reviews, there's a listen on section. You're able to click on that, and that will take you to several of the platforms that that podcast is on, you can click right into that podcast, start listening. But, you know, our users are already trust us so much. So once we, you know, we actually started doing podcast reviews because we were having parents asking for those, right? And so that's really the beautiful thing, is that was already, parents already listening to the podcast themselves. And we wanted to make sure that they knew that that was an element for kids, not only to listen to kids' podcasts, but as they get older, those are things they're going to start listening to. So let's, you know, make sure they understand that. So we do have our ratings and reviews, which is a bulk of what we do, but we also have a partnership with Apple Podcasts. So if you go into the Apple Podcast Kids and Family Room, that is hand curated by Common Sense Media. That is something I work on every single month. We have different themes that we change up every month. So this month we just added a swoosh for Disability Pride Month, which I'm really excited about. Different episodes. So we do episodic swooshes, which can just be like different episodes that you pull out, or we do actual full podcast episodes. So we're able to switch that up, but also in that section you have podcasts by different age, we have podcasts in Spanish, bilingual podcasts. You can go in there and all of that is hand touched and vetted by us. I will say, you know, with our ratings and reviews, people are always like, how do you rate and review? We have a very huge standardized scale of how we do that. And it comes from child development research. It's all research backed, which even when I came on, I was like, whoa, there's a ton that came into even like understanding those reviews. And every single one of our reviewers has to go through that training and understand that. And we're always talking about that, especially within the diversity rubric of like, what does that look like? And what should we be putting in here? And how should we be making sure that we're not just saying, oh, there was, you know, a Latino character or a Black character, but like, were they stereotyped? What did they sound like? Who was actually behind that voice? We go in depth in all of those things, which I will say I love to know as a parent. So those are really the two elements, including, you know, my connection with who I think I've talked to every single person on this panel personally, is really getting to know the people in the kids podcast space and connecting them to who we're connected with at Common Sense Media. So our education side, how can we connect creators to educators who want podcasts in their classroom, right? How are we connecting creators together to understand like how they can work together? So several different elements, but we're all on the same page, I think, of that discoverability for kids podcasts and trusted kids podcasts.
It's getting dark on the East Coast. I had to turn my light on. Laura, I would like to say on behalf of those of us that are reading the reviews that it shows the work that you put in, the time that you take, or your reviewers and your team take, to get to really know a show and understand what representation looks like on that show, what speaking to the audience looks like. You really, I think reading the reviews, it seems like a really informed take on the show, like someone really, again, took their time to get to know. And it,
I will say that most of our reviewers have worked in child development. They've worked as teachers, they're parents themselves. So a lot of them are like, we now listen to these podcasts with our kids.
Cool.
So that is meaningful. So what you feel from that, like, that means a lot, because my reviewers really do dive in.
That's so cool. That's so cool to know that, yeah, this person that reviewed your show is now a listener. That's really, what a neat thing to be able to feel like you got somebody in your corner like that, that they're working not just to get reviews out, but also to help those little ones in their life be seen, be heard, be reflected. Thank you, Laura. Mr. Jim, I'm going to turn to you. You have many things going on in your life, but you also have an actual thing that you get to talk to us and show. I know you have the in front of you. You can show us the story button. So Jim, you and your team have created a device that helps make kids podcasts more easily accessible by their target audience. I'd love for you to please talk about your goals in creating Storybutton, and also share some of those testimonials. Tell us how it works and what people are sharing about it so far. I know that it's not, I believe you said to me earlier that it is out in the world in 2 weeks, but people have been pre-ordering them. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
So we're shipping out. There's a little over 1,200 devices that have been pre-ordered that we're shipping out next week. But as far as
Congratulations on that.
thank you. As far as our area of focus of you mentioned my wild and crazy goal that by 2030 kids will listen to more content than they watch. It really comes down to when you look at, so when I started podcasting, this was something I stumbled into, recording stories for my own kids. And it eventually became this full-time love that I get to do. But when we look at the data to show where kids are listening, heavy amount of them, 85% plus, are listening on a screen device. And so that's either a parent's phone or an iPad. And I don't know about you, but I have 3 kids. I have 3 boys, 6, 8, and 9. And if I'm giving them an iPad, the chance of them even clicking into their dad's podcast over a video streaming app or a game is very low. They love my stories, but they don't love them that much. and so that was just, something that I really think there's so much area of growth for all of our audiences. There's so much great kids audio content out there. But why is most of it happening on screen devices? And so a year and a half ago began this journey of how can we move that listening experience and almost like bring back the radio, I grew up listening to radio dramas. That was something I loved as a kid, listening on my cassette player or on a radio. And so that is the birthplace of Storybutton, is to make listening to kids podcasts free and easy. And so when you purchase the device, it connects to the internet and streams all the great kid podcasts. So it's on demand. So you can scroll into a particular show, scroll down into an episode and click play. And so parents love it because it can live in a kid's bedroom or can move around the house, and they can listen to audio content without it counting as screen time. So when the screens go away after that hour or two that many families are monitoring, the screens go away, they can continue listening to the great audio content that we have in kid podcasting. So I believe that is the missing piece. I think there is a 30 to 50x potential in our kid podcasting consumption, that our industry has significant growth when we look at how much content is consumed in YouTube, and audio is very favorable for parents. And so if we can give families a better tool to listen to our content, I think we're going to have an explosion of the consumption of our medium.
I love you sharing that. And to connect to something we were saying before recording, the fact that there are so many people making such good content for kids, such good podcasts for kids, only means that when that 30 or 50% more listeners come on, there's already a wealth of really great shows that are there. So I'm glad that you are helping to make.
Let me clarify, not 30 to 50%, 30 to 50 times.
Times. I thought you were going to be like 30 to 50 people. No, that'd be awful.
No. Your biggest
times.
Yes. X.
So Jim, give us like, how many kids listen to podcasts now? Melly, what's our survey say? Let's connect all the lines. Just kidding. You don't need to pull stuff up. We do know, I believe when I looked at if I walk backwards, Melly, I actually know some of this from my brain. That I know we've had a lot of surveys come out in different countries saying that roughly 50% of grownups listen to podcasts. Is what we hear that. And beneath that, I believe we're hearing, am I right? Around 20% of kids 10 to 20 are listening to podcasts. I believe it was something close to that on the Kids Listen survey. I'm sorry that I'm doing this to you now and I didn't prepare. But to go, Jim, 30 to 50 times.
Let me explain that. Can I explain that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking that like a classroom of kids could easily get you like 10 times already.
So yes, it is. It's pretty well documented. Some studies say, there's a UTA study that said a third of US kids are listening to a podcast weekly or at least a month. There's different studies say different things depending on who you're talking to. I'm looking at the consumption. How much are they listening to? You know, a kid that listens to one episode a week, that's great, but there's a lot more time in a week. And so when you look at your biggest YouTube creators in the kid space, the Blippies, the Cocomelons, your top YouTube creators, they're doing 1 billion views a month. It's massive. Whereas the biggest kid podcast creators are doing single-digit millions. The cream of the crop, the biggest. That is a massive gap between 1 billion and a single-digit million. And that is the gap that I see as the potential for kids podcasting as our, that is how much growth we can win. As if YouTube is something that parents are very hyper conscious about, how much screen time are we allowing our kids to have in a day? We don't have that same barrier in podcasting. I don't know of many parents, and maybe there are, but I don't know of many parents that are putting limits on how much content their kids are listening to. Does that make some more sense, Mr. Matthew?
I'm glad I pushed on it because I think what's happening, maybe other people listening are feeling the same thing, is those are really big numbers to grapple with. The potential, but also the disparity between video and audio. And so as I'm hearing you share that, it feels like such a natural thing to go, well, if we're all saying that we want to limit how much we're on screens and we have this great audio content, it sounds like this panel of people is just really, we're all so blessed to be working in a space at just that right time that there's really great stuff being made. There's great tools being made to help access. There's great reviews and things being made to help curate that content. This seems like it's a really great time for parents to step into podcasts and explore this medium. Again, not just to share with their kids and help their kids find and enjoy and learn and love, but also in that co-listening space and in that inspiration space that will be ultimately making future podcasters out of these kids as they explore the medium, as kids are so wont to do with the things they love. Billions! I should have just led with the word billion, Jim. Should have just led with the word billion. Sorry.
Yes, and one last note to all the podcasters out there: Storybutton was built with all of you and us in mind, where every time a kid presses play, it counts as a download for you on your analytics side. So nothing is stored locally. And that was done intentionally, because that is how like a product like this of a device that makes it easier to listen to podcasting for kids, it needs to be both designed for the creator and the user. And so I just want to let you know, podcasters, I got your back. Don't worry.
Jim, I wonder if, I don't want to go too in the weeds because I do want to hop to our next person, but I wonder if when we podcasters are looking at our podcast data, if it will indicate that it's being listened to on that device.
That's a great question. Yeah. So I'm working with all the different apps hosting platforms,
sure,
to connect our user agent, which doesn't matter.
Okay.
But yeah, so we are making those connections. Generally speaking, yes, it would fall into that unknown bucket.
Okay.
But the podcasters that we're working with, as soon as they let me know what host that they're on, I can contact them directly and get that sorted out.
That's very, very cool. I always enjoy seeing, this is how many listen on Android or on Apple devices or on smart speakers. So neat to know that that there will inevitably be podcasters coming saying, there's a lot of downloads coming from this Storybutton thing, that it'll be able to happen like that. Melissa, I want to share. Melly shares in the chat. Whoop, glasses. Per the Kids Listen. Oh, it can go up on the screen. Kendra, you're amazing. Per the Kids Listen survey. Magic. 58% of adults from this survey listen to podcasts on YouTube, and only 8% of kids listen on YouTube. So a product like Storybutton, as Melly said, is amazing. Great stuff. I'm going to turn to another friend focusing on access, and that is Merideth. Merideth, you were also thinking about access when you created Storytopia. What is creating parent-trusted pathways look like for you in this space of curation and recommendation?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I started listening to podcasts probably at the dawn of podcast time, and my daughter, who is now 10, when she was that just tells you how old I am, but when she was 3-ish, I started looking for kids podcasts. And back then, one, there weren't a lot of options. There were really not very many published at the time. And two, they were just really hard to find. And over the last several years, especially since the pandemic, more and more wonderful children's podcasts are being created. And at the time that I started kind of pulling together lists of podcasts and categorizing them and kind of just doing it for myself to help her discover new shows, it felt like there was just not, I mean, it was even before Common Sense started with their review process. And I was a big user of Common Sense for movies and, just any sort of kids content. So when Common Sense started reviewing podcasts, I was delighted because it's always been a trusted resource in our family. But the thing that I felt was missing for us was categorization and the ability to see through all of the noise of the adult podcast space and kind of just narrow down kids podcasts and then understand which age category and kind of what content bucket they should go into. And so my journey started as a database. My background is in television, radio production, and then I spent 15 years in tech. So to me, I just wanted to compartmentalize everything and understand what age category this podcast was for. And I would listen to everything kind of before I, put it in front of my daughter. And then she would kind of thumbs up or thumbs down it. So we would know if it was meant for, her ears or someone else's. And then once I had started really collecting a lot of shows, I started making recommendations to friends. In the height of sort of the early days of the pandemic, tons of friends, other parents of kids that were my daughter's age, were asking for screen alternatives. And so I just started kind of just making recommendations. I discovered the Kids Listen community early on and found this really wonderful rich library of shows. But then I went deeper because I felt like there has to be more than just this list, and have found podcasts created by people around the world. So our mission at Storytopia is to share podcasts with kids everywhere and really build relationships with podcasters to help them find their audience, solve that discoverability challenge for both the creator, but also the families. And sort of as we have moved along in our journey, we have not only helped solve the discoverability problem for families, but for educators, librarians, anyone who is just now discovering kids podcasts as a true content alternative for kids, and helping those educators know which podcasts have great, educational documentation either on their website or just something that they're willing to kind of put together with their content. So I've worked with lots of educators in my community just to help them kind of understand how beneficial podcasts can be in the classroom. I've pointed them to all of the wonderful resources at Common Sense. I think the goal for everyone here tonight is to share this incredible content with kids everywhere. And I think that we're all going about it early days in these really unique ways. But I think at the end of the day, sharing this incredible content with kids is just the ultimate goal, right? Just to share stories. And that's just so much more rich. Like listening to me personally, like listening to audio and watching my kid and then other kids I've introduced podcasts to, watching their imaginations get triggered from just listening and not being distracted by the visual. And if you sat 5 kids down and they all listened to the same story, and you asked each of them what they envisioned the person wearing or looking like, or the path that they went down, or, you know, what did that story mean? Like everyone is going to have a different answer. And I just think that it's so beautiful to watch the impact that this content has on kids.
I remember, Meredith, hearing you talk, I feel like you're so much like an indie bookstore owner. And I love that about you, how carefully you're curating in order to try to help more and more listeners fall in love with what they hear and be seen with what they hear. It's so wonderful that you're doing that. Thank you for that. Well, I want to open up the panel to some questions, so you all are welcome to hop in as you'd like. And then we are saving time for Q&A at the end. So I want to ask all of you that, you know, we're talking about parents earning their trust, right? Trust is earned. Some of you are working in a space where not only though do we have to build trust with our parents and these kids that we're working with, but you also may need to advocate for why podcasts are a good choice to begin with for kids. If any of you are comfortable doing it, I'd love to ask if you could talk about how you're thinking about this and how it relates to your role in the kids podcast space, the why podcast as it relates to what you're doing.
I preach building trust all the time. I feel like people in this room have heard me say, like, you gotta build trust with your audience, you gotta build trust with your audience. And to piggyback on what Meredith just said, like that imagination piece, right? Like allowing the kid to just listen to something and just explore and create their own world based on what they hear. It's such a magical and impactful piece. And then to see them take the lessons that they've learned and the world they envision and see that amplified in their daily lives, parents can really trust, like, oh, they learned something from this show, or this show taught them something, or this show allowed them to see someone who doesn't look like them in a different light, in a more positive, welcoming and friendly light. Instead of putting a picture in front of someone and saying, this is how someone looks, and this is how someone, every neighborhood looks the same. Like, no, every neighborhood doesn't look the same. Every neighborhood doesn't sound the same. Every group of kids doesn't sound the same. And the power is in the kids' hands to create that world, to really explore, I keep saying the magic of their mind, which is so powerful. And as an actor myself, like I stand on the stage at Little Shop of Horrors every day, and I have to use my imagination to be this character, so fusing my world of theater and storytelling and bringing it to kids it's an honor to do so. And I really hope that the parents who listen to my show and all my friends' shows, they really know that, like, I can trust this creator to create a safe space for my kid to explore. I can trust that they're not going to teach my kid bad things. And I also find it really, really important that I talk to my parents, that when I'm on social media, I am talking to my parents. Parents, what is it that you need? Parents, what is it that you're struggling with? Parents, it's summertime. How can I help you? What kind of stories do you want to hear? And the parents will tell me, and I'm like, okay, this parent is struggling with the siblings fighting each other, or like this parent is struggling with getting a kid to go to sleep at night. So I can pull from my parents and my resources after having conversations with them and make content that fills the need that they need. And that's so important in the podcast space because it is so intimate and so indie. And we're not like Netflix and Disney and it's just like content, but no, you can really connect with your listeners and find out what it is that they're looking for, what it is that they need. And that builds trust even more. So build the trust with your audience, everyone.
Melly, it sounds like you're being such a good teacher using such wonderful responsive teaching. You're hearing and listening.
Yes.
and making sure that you don't just go on your path with your show, but rather go, what do you need? How can I continue to serve you and tell stories? That's great. Thanks for sharing that.
To piggyback off of what Melly said, just in the time that I've been working on Storytopia, I've had such an incredible opportunity to work with and get to know and collaborate with so many creators in the space, hundreds and hundreds of them. I've had so many conversations. And I think what I have discovered is that they all have this deep-rooted love of wanting to create incredible content for kids. They want to create a safe space for kids. They want to create stories that are meaningful. And just like Melly said, like their goal is to connect not just with their audience of listeners, kids, but also with parents and help understand sort of what parents need in this time where, let's just be honest, content for your kids can be scary, right? Like this is a space where I hear and see and have witnessed so many content creators sort of rising above the noise of what the other content that's out there is providing for our kids. And I think that's really, really a wonderful thing about this community of creators.
I'll say on the consumer side, because we definitely, at Common Sense, of course, the education side too, but that's also like a gateway into that trust with parents. But like, as far as why podcasts for parents when there's other forms of media, accessibility is a huge one, right? You don't have to have a ton of money to go buy a TV or to make sure that you have all the streaming services so you can get that one, show that they want, right? This is something that can be done together as a family, right? Or with siblings or whoever you're with, and to start discussions, right? A lot of the times when you're watching TV or a movie, you're not having that discussion at the time. It may be later, or it's just very passive, or you're doing something else. When you're listening, you can have those active discussions. It starts that imagination flowing, right? A lot of the times too, with that imagination, I think, obviously like Hollywood is trying to start to catch up diversity and inclusion wise. But the one great thing about podcasts and audio only is that a kid can close their eyes and they can see themselves imagined as that character they're listening to. They don't have to have that visual in front of them. They can say like, oh, that could be me. I can transform myself into that character, which is so beautiful. And they can do that quicker than a show is able to, like a TV show or a movie is able to, right? So there is more of that opportunity. And then also on like the education side, a lot of what we preach as why podcasts in the classroom is the same thing as why podcasts at home, is that it's kind of easier to like put that chocolate on the broccoli, right? I get sayings wrong, so that might not be the right saying, but you get what I mean. Like you're able to learn these social, emotional lessons through podcasts, whether they mean to have that in them or not. I mean, the quality content that we hear is are really shows that podcasts that have that content, but it's just filtered in, or like, within all of like the entertainment value from that podcast, and they're learning from the stories or from who's talking. So there's just an ability to be able to learn and also imagine and access. And I think for us, those are the three really like values from podcasts as to why that's a great media format.
I'll add a couple things, including that I always eat my chocolate before broccoli.
Not together?
But I would, a couple of the buzzwords that jumped out at me of what you were saying, of imagination and creativity, everybody, like that is so important for especially this Gen Alpha group of kids, this generation that's coming up in, sorry to say this bingo word, AI, the AI that they will live in and grow up with, all those tools that will allow them to create incredible things, all comes back to like their imagination and creativity. What are they able to, because now when they grow up, AI is going to be able to let them do anything they want to do. But it comes back to, it starts here. And I view, everyone's brains work differently, but video is something that I see as it's a passive consumption. I can sit back and just like watch it, and it's super passive. Audio is different because when you get sucked into that audio story, the audio book or a podcast, like your mind is working and building that world, and that has to be magical in a kid's imagination development. So that is something that I think is incredibly important. And from a industry perspective, do not sleep on audio for kids, because it's a very special place and low cost to introduce IP. It is significantly less expensive than launching a Netflix show in delivering your IP to a large audience. Audio has a special place to not only test IP, but really like cost effectively deliver it to a lot of kids.
If I can add on that just really quickly too, I love that you bring that up, Jim, because I think too, there is this ability for connection in a really like deep way. When I think of AI, I think of like, eventually like AI will like, yeah, people say like it will take over, but what we'll then crave at that point is like human connection. And that's something that I've found just from my own podcast listening, especially, is like what's so special about podcasts is because it feels like that person's talking to you, whether it's a character, whether it's, kind of like more of a talk show, whether, kids are hearing voices of other kids, right? They feel like that's my best friend. And if you're talking about IP, like a lot of, networks like Nickelodeon has done this, where they take a certain character. PBS has done this with Arthur, right? They'll take a certain character and then that character is brought into the podcast space. And now there's this connection that you didn't have when you were watching, right? Like now Arthur's my friend. Like Arthur's talking to me on the podcast. And that I think is so cool. And I will tell you, like, even when I listen to podcasts like that, I'm like, I feel like this is accessible. And when we're talking about the next generation, that's the next generation of podcast creator. That's something that's accessible for them to create and have a voice. And they don't have to be like, ooh, can I be the next actor? And I'm going to have to like wait tables and then also act on the side. Like, no, you can go and start a podcast. So that's really accessible for kids as well to have their own voice and make a difference in media as well.
And there's already this really great group of kid podcasters that are creating programming, and like we're categorizing that as well, like so that kids can find kids, right? And like 9-10-year-old kids creating really incredible content, interviewing so interesting people. Like it's just so fun to watch that generation kind of be the next creators. It's really cool.
All right, well, panelists, we are so glad that you all joined for this conversation. I have a final question, but I also want to invite any of our listeners, any of our watchers, any of our streamers to please ask questions of our panelists. And if you don't have a question, I'd also love to invite you to respond to this question that I'm going to close with our panelists in a sentence or two as we wrap up and we prepare for this Q&A. What are your hopes and dreams for the kids podcast space as a whole? In a line or two, hopes and dreams.
For it to be recognized in the same way that Disney movies are recognized.
That's enough. I think copy paste.
Period. Drop the mic. But not really, because they're expensive.
I really do hope that we see in the next few years more and more kids being introduced, and it being a medium that kids everywhere can have access to and learn from. It's like everyone has said, it's an inexpensive way to create content and inform. And I would just love to see that 30 to 50x.
30 to 50x.
30 to 50x.
First here.
I want to see that. I think it would be incredible.
Yeah, I think, definitely what everyone has said, but, and also just for kids to like, I would love to hear, be out and hear one kid say to another kid, like, oh my gosh, did you hear that one podcast, or did you listen to that one episode, or have those, like, really start having those discussions and have that be like really part of their everyday media consumption. And then also on the education side, just like, that's on every syllabus, right?
I can't wait. I mean, I think I'm waiting for that serial moment in kids podcast where there's something that is just like, it just rocks the foundation of the medium and makes people that didn't listen or didn't pay attention to the medium tune into the medium. But I think as I say that, I also then think about kids, and I think about how I can't wait for them to take this medium and be creating things like we listen to as adults, like our listen along podcast that we listen along as we watch our favorite shows. I can't wait to have kids using that medium to communicate with one another and process what they're seeing and hearing, because kids will grow and the way that they process will change, and all these wonderful timestamps, if given in a safe environment, can be a really neat way for them to process and grow and build empathy even faster together and find their people, find their community, find that safety even faster. We have a question, if Kendra, you don't mind sharing with all of us, with the low barriers of entry versus TV. Panelists, what do you see, or do you see an oversaturation of the market happening for kids podcasts and audio content? Or maybe as of today, do you see oversaturation? We've seen it with adult podcasts for sure. Will the same happen for kids?
Yes.
No.
Melly, I'm going to be cynical and say the only way that it's going to get oversaturated for kids is if it becomes highly monetarily lucrative.
Well,
Yeah.
I see it because you can buy a $60 mic and anybody can get in there and tell a story. I didn't say that the story was good. I didn't say that the content was good. But you have a million influencers, and you have like the Jackie Inas who do the amazing makeup beats, and then you have girls who buy makeup from the beauty supply store and their content's not as good, but they're all makeup influencers. There's going to be oversaturation everywhere.
That isn't, yeah. We have to define kind of like what we mean by that word of oversaturation, because, they're
going to be, it's going to be a million people everywhere.
Is YouTube oversaturated?
Yes.
I guess, but that doesn't mean
it's good.
Anything.
Well, and I think too, like the beauty of that, if you want to call it oversaturation, I think there's probably like a better term for it that doesn't kind of come with some like negative connotation. I just can't think of it right now. But what I would say is like the beauty of that is that there's something for everyone, and not every single person in this world, as we know, is a cut and paste. And so something I might like to listen to history from like this podcast and that podcast, because part of me likes to hear this voice and part of me likes how this podcast does it. And so it lets you be a more dynamic self by hearing more dynamic stories and audio.
Laura, I have a word for you, which a friend had shared with me, which is the nichification of things.
There we go.
The abundance of things, but having a million history podcasts, but having them from such different perspectives that individuals are able to connect in a way that is just different. I think that
here's what I think is a way to describe this oversaturation. It's where does demand and supply meet? And so right now, I think there is so much, like I've said many times, there's so much room for demand to grow that I think as demand grows over the next 5 years in the consumption of that media, the supply will have to catch up. And so there will be an inflection point over the next 5 years where there's going to be immense growth opportunities for kid podcasts to expand their audience, expand their reach. But then, yes, there will be a point where that supply meets demand, and then it's harder to grow.
I think we're so far from any sort of oversaturation, because if you think about the adult market, it's 4 million podcasts and maybe 250,000 active, right? Like posting weekly, monthly, whatever it is. And we're in the hundreds, maybe thousands for kids. And there's so many genres that there's no podcasts in. There's so many age categories where there's no podcasts in. So there's so much room for new content before we ever see any sort of oversaturation in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think
With
too,
you.
like, that's why I think it's important what we're doing at Common Sense Media, because once that time does come, it's like the cream rises to the top, right?
Yep.
Is that a saying? Because I just said it. But you know, that's where we filter out, like, okay, yeah, there are billions of podcasts, right? But which ones really have the great audio quality? Which ones are diverse? Which ones are telling important stories? You know, so that it's not just, yeah, everyone has their time to come up to the mic, but like, what are you bringing?
Yeah.
And that's important. And that's kind of where you have things like, you know, I think what all of us are doing and vetting these podcasts to say, like, okay, but it's okay if it's oversaturated, because we're going to do that work for you to let you know, like, where that good stuff is.
All right, we have another question from a LinkedIn user. If we could put that on the board, thanks. To Jim, Melly, and Meredith, you all offer similarity in services in terms of providing a platform to find great kids content. Do you see yourselves as competitors? How does competition as a platform look like in this space?
Me, no, because I don't have an app. I am just a creator, and I create stories about Black kids. I don't think anybody
But
else
for
is
Kids
like,
Listen, Melly, in representing Kids Listen,
well, we're
does
not,
Kids Listen
yeah.
feel like a competitor to Storytopia or to Storybutton or anything like that? Perhaps is the way to approach it.
Well, no, because with Kids Listen, you're getting an active community where people are talking. It's not just a vehicle for parents to use to listen to shows. Like, we're in Slack and on emails talking every day on how to build. So I'm out of the situation.
I'm excited to see. There's been a lot of activity this calendar year of new kids podcast networks starting up, and there's been quite a bit of money and attention flowing into our industry, and it's not going into my pocket. It's going into other companies and other people, which is, I think it's great. I think the greater the attention, the greater the opportunities that keep coming into kids podcasting is going to rise us all. And so I think we are all fighting for the same thing, fighting for the same goal. So I definitely feel arm in arm,
Yeah,
rather than fist to fist.
I would agree. I think our goal is to create awareness in this space, and that's what everyone's, you know, working really hard to do, whether it's their own content or whether it's creating a platform that more kids can have access to listen to, whether it's working with teachers and parents and the broader community of families. We're all working toward the same thing. And really, truly, I would call us just advocates for this space and these kids. So I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing. And I don't feel and have never felt like anyone's stepping on anyone's toes. I think it's all, what do they say, Laura? The tide raises all
Chocolate strawberries? Broccoli? What?
No, chocolate strawberries.
Rising tide raises all broccoli with
Thank you,
the
Matthew.
chocolate milk of the.
I know that question wasn't for me, but I would say just look at, like, and this is high level, right? But like, eventually there are competitors, and there's such thing as friendly and like competition that works together. It's not mutually exclusive to be a competitor and then work together for the same goal. I mean, look at Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, Freevee. How many streaming apps are there? And we all buy them because this one show is over here and this other show is over here and this other shows. They all have what we need in different elements. And yeah.
And even at a micro level, each of us making podcasts, we know that kids do only have a certain amount of time to listen in a day, just like we grown-ups have a certain amount of bandwidth. And so there is perhaps a risk of battling for their attention. But I for one, feel like we've got a really great community in the kids podcast space. Generally speaking, I feel like as the panelists are saying, we all want the same thing, and everybody wins when we're fighting for these kids, especially when in community with these friends that I brought onto this panel. You are hearing modeled, and then you are also modeling that we just recommend our friends all the time. I'm recommending Melly's stuff all the time. I could be talking to my kids all that I wanted, all of my students that I teach to be like, oh, but I listen to a podcast, listen to me. But we just don't. It's just modeled in this community and maybe just by the people I'm surrounding myself with, that we just want to cheer on our friends. We want kids to fall in love with that sci-fi podcast and that bedtime podcast and that social justice podcast, because we know how complex they are, and to know that I can't make all of those, but I have really good friends that I trust that are making them. I think to close out this panel, we work to make these parent trust pathways by trusting one another and by lifting up one another and helping to do this work hand in hand together.
Sure.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Melly, Laura, Meredith, Jim. Thank you, Common Sense Media, for the larger work you're doing with reviews. Thank you, Kids Listen. Thank you, Storybutton. Thank you, Storytopia. I hope everyone that joined us will follow up with these great access points and review points and content, and great people behind what we're making. Thank you, Children's Media Association, for hosting us, and all of you that joined us tonight and will join us on the archives. We encourage you to reach out, connect. We're a loving community that is only going to cheer you on if you have an idea that you think would help serve kids and meet kids where they are. Thank you all.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, Matthew. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.